Hello there. Welcome back to Jennie Designs with Paper and this week's episode of Crime and Coloring, where we take an alphabetical journey through the United States and revisit some of the earlier crimes. But before we talk crime, let's talk coloring. This week I am making a one-layer Christmas card, well, kind of one-layer Christmas card with the Avery L. Gingerbread Kisses stamp set, the Ink Blot Shop Surface Borders stamp set. We need some masking paper, and at the end, when the card is all put together, I have a new to my craft room supply item to create puffy snow. So hang on for that. It looks super cool. My camera is having a bit of an issue focusing today because I'm doing a lot of white on white coloring. So hang in there. I know it's rough, but the card turns out super duper cute. Like I said, Copic coloring, Neenah Classic Crest 80-pound cardstock, and then snow. So now that we've talked coloring, let's jump into our crime. Our alphabetical journey today takes us to the state of Connecticut. The area of Connecticut was part of the original territory of the United States. It was chartered as a colony in 1662. In 1786, it ceded area to the United States government that became part of the Northwest Territory in 1787. Connecticut ratified the U.S. Constitution on January 9, 1788, and was the fifth of the original 13 colonies to join the Union. Its boundary was generally the same as the present state, although the boundary between Connecticut and Massachusetts changed slightly in 1804. Sorry, my braces are an issue this week. Invisalign, they change every week and you never know what's going on. Anyway, some of the most impressive inventions that we know and use and thoroughly enjoy were actually created in Connecticut. For example, Pez candy and dispensers, the hamburger, can openers, scrapbooks, frisbees, Polaroid cameras, lollipops, vulcanized rubber, and the American English Dictionary. Connecticut had it going on. Connecticut has a pretty incredible state insect, the praying mantis. Oddly enough, the praying mantis is not a native to Connecticut insect. Between 1701 and 1874, Connecticut had two state capitals, New Haven and Hartford. The state of Connecticut is pretty serious about its pickles. To be considered a true pickle, the pickle must bounce when you drop it on a hard surface. All you pickle lovers, start bouncing your pickles. Not my kids, because I don't want to smell that in my house. Connecticut is the fourth most densely populated state, but not even close to being one of the largest. In fact, I think it is the third smallest state. Anesthesia was first used in Connecticut, gratefully. If you've ever had any kind of procedure, you're grateful for that anesthesia. And Connecticut is the state where the disappearance of a child spurred one of the largest manhunts in U.S. and state history. We're going to start today talking about Peter Franklin Smith. Peter was born on November 28, 1914 in Sundance, Wyoming, to Nels and Marie Smith. Nels was a former governor in Wyoming, actually. We're also going to talk about Helen Jensen. Helen was born on January 14th in 1915 in Connecticut to Christian and Esther Jensen. Somewhere in the realms of the world, Peter and Helen were married. I'm going to assume college. But they were married on October 23rd, 1937, in Helen's parents' home in Greenwich, Connecticut, or Greenwich. Not sure how they pronounce that in Connecticut. They went on to have two children, Nels and Constance, often called Connie. Unfortunately, the marriage between Peter and Helen ended in a more amicable than normal divorce in 1949. The two ended up purchasing ranches that were next to each other in Wyoming for the sake of their children, and Nels and Connie apparently went back and forth between the two houses at will or at convenience. In 1950, Peter actually remarried and eventually went on to have 2 more daughters, Ellen and Dorothy. Now, during the summer of 1952, Helen it was her turn to have summer vacation with Connie and Nels, so she took Connie to visit her parents in Connecticut. However, fearing that Connie would become bored, as 10-year-olds are apt to do, during their long visit, she decided that she would register Connie for a sleepaway camp called Camp Sloan. This was a camp that had deep roots in the area and had been in operation since the 1920s. It was actually an affiliate of the YMCA. So Connie had been at camp. I think what I read was that she was scheduled to be there 3 weeks. And after she'd been there for a couple of weeks, Helen and Helen's parents went to visit Connie for her birthday. So they had a little family get-together birthday party, yay. And while they were there, Connie actually asked her mom if she could stay longer than their original plan. Now, Helen told Connie that was not possible, assumedly because of the divorce and child custody agreement that was in place. So it sounds like the idea that sending Connie to camp was successful and Connie was having a good time, although one article I read said she did not put up much of a fuss about not having her camp time extended. So on July 15th, which is just 4 days after Connie's birthday, while she was still at camp, Connie took a fall, and that bruised her hip pretty substantially and broke her glasses. Now, Connie, bless her, was a nearsighted, cute little gal, and she could not see very well without her glasses and had to hold things quite close to her face to read. Half of my children are nearsighted. I totally get that. It's a giant pain. Now, the next day, on the 16th, there was some kind of kerfuffle between Connie and some other girls at the camp, and they were actually involved in a fight that caused Connie to have a bloody nose. Connie went to the nurse, got an ice pack for her nose, and in the reports that I read, the cause of the fight and the identity of the other girls were never written down. So I'm sure somebody knows what happened and why, but nobody in the records I found bothered to write that down. Anyway, after this fight, Connie told her tent mates that she was going to skip breakfast and then take the ice pack back to the dispensary. So her tent mates headed off to breakfast and, well, Connie didn't. So the weather that day was near 80 degrees. There was a slight breeze. And that morning, Connie had been dressed in a pair of blue plaid shorts, but a long sleeve shirt, tan shoes, and a bright red zippered windbreaker. Connie had shoulder-length brown hair with bangs that had been tied back into a red ribbon. Connie was also taller than most 10-year-old girls and had been and could be mistaken for an older child or younger teen. Now, when her tent mates returned from breakfast, they noticed a couple of things. Connie wasn't there, and the ice pack she had told them she was going to return to the dispensary was still sitting on her cot. So her tent mates notify the camp counselors, and a search is undertaken. But it wasn't until the after lunch that actually began to be a real concern. Like it was afternoon before the camp really started investigating where Connie had gone. And after some time, and I didn't read how long, they actually made the decision to call the authorities in because it was starting to look like Connie had just walked away from camp. Okay, put a pin in the story for a minute. I'm a mama. I had 7 10-year-olds. Not a snowball's chance I'm letting my kids go to a camp where a 10-year-old can just walk away. And none of them seemed all that concerned about a 10-year-old being unaccounted for. That was my first red flag when I saw this story. Okay, pull up the pin, go back to the story. So the camp counselors called the local authorities, and the state police came and did an investigation. And one of the first people they spoke to was a camp caretaker who was doing some work by the gate of the camp, like the road that came into the camp near the gateway. And he said that he saw a girl matching Connie's description, wearing her the clothing she was described as having been wearing, whatever those proper words are. Sorry, you all. He said he saw her down the road past the gate picking flowers. And he did not think much of it because he assumed that based on her height, she was one of the camp counselors. He also added that she was wearing a black purse, along with her previously noted clothing. One thing to note is that the camp counselor said that the campers were not allowed to carry cash. So probably what was in her purse would have been pictures of her and her friends, maybe a chapstick, lip gloss kind of thing, whatever a 10-year-old girl from the 1950s would carry in a handbag that wasn't money. Anyway, so that was about 8 o'clock in the morning. The investigators were able to establish that about 8:15, Connie had stopped at the home of the Horstmans, which was about a quarter mile down the road from the camp, and had actually asked directions to Lakeville, which was the closest town. And then, some minutes later, she asked directions again from Alice Walsh, who lived a little farther down the road from the camp. Alice did note and did tell the investigators that it looked as though the girl that she spoke to, Connie, had been crying. Connie was given directions to town both times, and both families said that they did not know she was 10. She appeared to be older than she was. And no one really questioned why she was walking down the road by herself. And Alice even later stated that it wasn't unusual for girls from the camp to stop and ask directions to town. Again, what in the world is going on at this camp? How are 10-year-olds regularly walking away from camp? Anyway, my mama feathers are all riled, y'all. Connie's trail kind of went cold after she stopped at those two homes for directions, and then she was reportedly sighted on a road like 2 miles away from camp. Connie walked up the driveway of a house on Route 112 and asked the two maids that were there for directions again to Lakeville. And they told her to keep on going, and when she got to the top of the hill, to turn. Like, turn right, I think they said. And then they watched her go, and not knowing that she was not supposed to be out and about, this was the last reported sighting of Connie, and it was 8:45 in the morning. Now, the road that Connie was seen to be traveling along was a well-traveled route. There was a private elementary school around the corner from where she was last seen. There were other houses, some of them dating back as far as the Revolutionary War. This road had once been a Native American trail, and then it had been used to haul ore from the local mines. Coal burners had basically deforested this entire area, hauling ore back and forth from the mines. So this area that the camp is in is wide open. The sides of the road the area next to the side of the road was basically deforested. There were not many trees. So it's not as if somebody could hide behind a tree and jump out and grab Connie, or that Connie could hide behind a tree from other people. There just wasn't a lot of places for her to hide other than around these homes and buildings. Now, while the investigation is going on, while the authorities, the state police, are searching, Helen and Peter are obviously notified. So Helen comes from her parents' house and begins to help with the search. Peter caught a flight from Wyoming and also came to search. Peter showed up in Connecticut wearing cowboy boots and a 10-gallon hat and was referred to as the Marlboro Man. Apparently had the mustache and everything. All throughout the searches, Connie's parents talked about her love of animals, her love of flowers, and her love of comic books. Peter even chartered a plane and conducted an air search. Again, this area is relatively deforested, so an air search should be able to spot a little girl wearing a red jacket. They also used World War II Jeeps and covered 20 square miles, going as far as into New York State. And you would think that this girl wearing a red jacket would have been quickly found, especially given that there were no large clumps of trees. But there was no sign of Connie. None. Now, the historic record of the area on that day showed that traffic was particularly heavy at that time of day. I'm guessing there's a town recorder or something that kept those notes. But so there is a record of what traffic and the weather looked like on this day, this July day in 1952. And it seems that this road was rather busy and that there were lots of people driving to and from town, getting ready to open their businesses and getting ready to shop. One such couple was John Bruin and his wife, and they claimed to have seen through the rearview mirror Connie hitchhiking. And then another woman, who was referred to as Mrs. Barnett, said she saw the girl walking east on the north side of Route 44. So apparently Route 44 was the road that came out of the camp, and then at some point it intersected with Route 112, and Route 112 was the road that went into town. And so these two roads were kind of a busy traveling area. So if in fact Mrs. Barnett had seen her on the north side of Route 44, that would have been like 1.25 miles away from the camp. The house where she spoke to the maids was about 2 miles away. But in spite of these sightings, and in spite of the heavy traffic, and in spite of her being a child, she vanished. She literally vanished. And her disappearance sparked the largest search party in the state of Connecticut, in the history of the state of Connecticut. Given that her grandfather was a former governor of Wyoming, it also spurred a national investigation. The FBI were involved. It was big. This was a big deal. And this is after some of those more famous child abductions like the Lindbergh kidnapping. So by now there are laws and rules in place about what happens when children disappear. Now, because Connie cannot be found and has not been found, and there's no trace of her, and their emotions are running high, this is when speculation and theories begin to develop and kind of run away with themselves. And one theory that came up quite early in the investigation, but it was also kind of put to bed very early, was that Helen had taken and hidden Connie in an attempt to have her longer that summer than the custody agreement stipulated. Which, in my mind, seems kind of weird, given that these two divorced parents purchased homes next to each other so that their children could go back and forth as necessary and as convenient. And it seems like they searched together for this child, and there's no report that they were anything but helpful and kind to each other while they were looking for their daughter. So the idea that Helen had hidden Connie was quickly put to rest. There was no evidence that was even a plausible theory. Another theory that was thrown out there was that Connie had hitchhiked back to Wyoming because she was homesick. And I suppose that this theory comes from the couple saying that they saw her hitchhiking in their rearview mirror. But Connie's mom wasn't in Wyoming. She was still in Connecticut. So it seems like if she was going to hitchhike, she would hitchhike back to her grandparents in Connecticut. Another theory was that a band of gypsies that had been camping close by in the New York-Connecticut border area had taken Connie. They got a phone tip from a woman claiming to see Connie with this group of gypsies. by the time the investigators got to where they had been camping, they had picked up camp and gone, and the only thing that was left behind was a van with Colorado plates on it. The police even went as far as Cooperstown, New York, investigating a tip that Connie was there. But no Connie. Some even blamed her disappearance on a circus that was traveling through town, although historical records don't indicate that the circus came that close to where she was. Now, Peter thought the sightings of Connie throughout New York meant that Connie was headed to visit relatives in Chicago. So he was holding out hope she was trying to go see cousins. I'm not sure how Connecticut equaled Chicago, but that was his hope. And she never showed up at her cousin's house. Police actually began to carry around a photo of Connie, and anytime they came in contact with a person, they asked if they'd seen this girl. So this is like the precursor to the missing kid on the milk bottle, right? In September of 1952, so that was July, so 3 months later, the police received a tip that Connie was in Texas. So I think it was the FBI that went to Texas to investigate this tip, and it turns out that this girl who was reported as being Connie was actually a Native American girl who had run away to Texas to train horses, but ended up working as a maid. She was, in fact, 18 years old, and according to the police report, looked 18. She weighed 110 pounds approximately, which is nothing like the 85-pound 10-year-old Connie. So the state police renewed the search again, and in November of 1952, 10,000 copies of a missing person bulletin were printed with Connie's information on it. This bulletin was circulated to every police station in the United States. The FBI offices, all of them. Dental and optical journals got her medical records. All of the superintendents of schools and game wardens in the state of Connecticut got this bulletin. This was a huge disbursement of information. In the late fall of 1952, men on horseback actually went back to this area surrounding the camp and spent 2 days on horseback looking for clues about maybe where Connie had taken, where she had, the direction she had gone in, or looking for Connie herself. They spent 6 hours on Saturday and 6 hours on Sunday and returned empty-handed. They had nothing. No trail, no belongings, no sightings, no nothing. That was about the same time that Connie offered a reward. Her reward stipulated that if her daughter was returned, or if the remains were returned, she would give the person a reward. The reward for her return alive was greater than the reward for her remains, but there was an expiration date on this. After January 1st of 1954, the reward would be rescinded, and Helen would no longer be handing out that money. And I think that was an attempt to motivate whoever had her to turn her in sooner or later. Nobody, not a person, called to claim their reward. None. And I think that it was $3,000. I forgot to write it down. $3,000 for her alive, and this is in 1952, and then $1,000 for her remains. So that's not a small chunk of change. In April of 1953, a traveling salesman named Frederick Pope claimed that his former traveling companion, Jack Walker, had killed Connie in Arizona after picking her up along Route 44. Then he admitted that it was a hoax, and the assumption was that he had admitted that in an attempt to extort the reward, but when he could not deliver Connie, he obviously could not collect the reward. Later, and I can't remember what time frame, but after Frederick Pope made his claim in 1953, there were remains found in Arizona of a teenage girl. She looked to be about the height that Connie would have been, And Connie's dentist and 2 other experts were not able to determine if those remains were Connie's. She had some dental work in her mouth, and 3 fillings matched the type and style that her family dentist had been using in his practice since he began. The 4th filling was a type and style that did not come into use until after Connie disappeared. And I did not read whether or not how many fillings they said Connie had when she disappeared, whether she had 3 or 4. I did not read that anywhere. So I suppose if you wanted to believe that this was Connie, then it would mean that either she had 4 fillings and one was different, or she had 3 when she left and 1 after she disappeared. But I don't know. So there were some other sightings and craziness that follows a missing child, including a psychic horse. This horse predicted that Connie would be found in LA. Peter and Helen really were desperate to find anything that could lead them to Connie. But the psychic horse did not pan out. Color me surprised. In 1954, a photo appeared in a New York newspaper of a group of beachgoers that included a girl that resembled Connie. However, the next day, the mother of that child identified her as a girl from Virginia. About that same time, that same year, 1954, there was a man on death row named George Davies, and he was on death row for murder, I think it was. He was on death row for murder. And he claimed to have killed and buried Connie in a shallow grave. Now, after that confession, a newspaper delivery man told his wife that he did not think George could have killed Connie because he was working elsewhere. And he did not elaborate on that, but he did comment on the clothing that Connie was wearing when she disappeared. Now, just before George was executed, like literally just before, he recanted that and said he actually didn't have anything to do with Connie's disappearance or death. It was just kind of an attempt to buy some time, apparently. But when the delivery man, a Mr. Smith, no relation to Helen and Peter or Connie, and his wife were going through a divorce, Mrs. Smith told the police about her soon-to-be ex-husband's comments about Connie and George, including his statement that he would have left her in the woods and that Connie had tried to call her father before she disappeared. Peter never received a phone call from Connie. She even mentioned that her almost ex-husband's route took him near Camp Sloan, which is where Connie disappeared. The police obviously are super excited about this information. Mr. Smith was given and passed a polygraph test. I'm not admissible, I know. But as the investigation continued into Mr. and Mrs., or the almost former Mrs. Smith, they unearthed an unhappy marriage, a contentious divorce, including a domestic dispute just days before the Mrs. spoke to the police. So it was determined that her testimony was unreliable. Mr. Smith was interviewed again in 2000, and he denied having anything to do with Connie's death or disappearance. Then in 1955, police received a mysterious call from a man saying he had something to get off his chest. He identified himself as William Duggan and called the police station Collect from Canada. He said that he had worked for the circus 13 years before in Connecticut. Now, the state police in Connecticut were very busy dealing with the aftermath of Hurricane Connie, super weird coincidence, and asked the Canadian police to follow up and report back, but they didn't. And William's wife then called the police and said that he could not have been there. He was a soldier in Japan. Wasn't even in Canada. So William was all but forgotten until 1988, when a retired trooper, the one who had taken the phone call in 1955, read a news story about a William Redmond from Pennsylvania being charged with another murder. And that William was a retired carnival worker. So police looked into the connection, but they could not police this William from Pennsylvania in Connecticut. And when given a polygraph test concerning the disappearance or death of Connie, this William from Pennsylvania passed. I did not notice if they asked him if he was the same William that called before or not. So in case you haven't shaken your head enough with this case, there was a woman in 1989 in Michigan whose name was Connie, and her and her husband were watching a TV show about the disappearance of Connie, and this Michigan woman thought she might be Connie. She was the right approximate age. She looked like her, and her theory was based on the fact that she had 0 memories before the age of 10. So she submitted some blood work, and that showed no DNA, no familial link to Connie's family members. Peter, Connie's father, returned to the area of her disappearance many times through the years. He appeared on the Art Linkletter show asking for help to find his daughter. In an interview in 1984, Peter said he imagined his daughter in the faces of women he would pass that were about Connie's age and that looked like her. And he always hoped something would turn up. He always hoped that she would show up someday. Helen actually gave an interview in 1954 saying she wanted Connie back dead or alive. She said she had to know what happened to Connie, and she later told her son Nels that not knowing was worse than death. Helen actually died in 1961 from a heart attack, and I'm not sure what she knew about the remains of the girl that were found in Arizona, whether she knew about that connection and then that dental examination or not. Peter died in 2012 at the age of 97, and then Nels, who was with his father when he died, took over the search for his sister. Nels gave his DNA to the authorities for comparison in case any remains were unearthed that could have been his sister. And then family records that I found showed that Nels actually died in September of 2023. This is another one of those stories that is really just sad. I wish her family had had some closure before they passed away. Unsolved ones are hard. This is a picture of Camp Sloan that appeared in the newspaper about the time that Connie disappeared. And I have a picture of Connie. I believe this is the picture that they added to the flyer that they passed around the entire United States. Thanks so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you enjoyed this story. I have a couple of other videos here I think you would like, as well as that subscribe button. I would love to hear your comments and feedback and theories down below, so go ahead and leave me a comment. If you haven't subscribed, please do. Give me a thumbs up and have a really fabulous day.